Hello, everybody. I'm Derek Arden, and welcome to the Live and Uncut podcast, sharing stories of extraordinary people who keep themselves under the radar. David Skinner, who's our speaker tonight, has conquered all sorts of mountains, Mont Blanc, the Matterhorn, to the Andes, and then he decided, as he got a little bit older, to cycle the length of Wales. And it was an extraordinary story. I was following David on the Garmin app as he was doing it. And we'll delve into David's motivations and how he relates this epic ride to the challenges of life. Whether you're an adventurer or a fan of human determination, this episode will inspire and motivate you. David, welcome to Monday Night Live. Thanks for joining us. And tell us what it was all about, what fired you up, and what was the fun things that you saw.
Well, you might think, having seen this, I'm commissioned by the Welsh Tourist Board, but I'm not. Um, I mean, this was for me quite a demanding challenge. It was one I thought I could do. I was reasonably comfortable with, but you never quite know until you do it. But it's worth remembering that what's demanding for one person, what's a challenge for one person, is different for everyone else. It's a very personal thing. So there are some people who probably couldn't conceive of cycling one hour, let alone 4 days. And there are others who would take one look at that route and think, well, let's do this in a day. And then there'll be others who think, well, a day's not enough. Let's go there and back in 2 days. So there's a whole range of different people, and this happened to be something which was a challenge for me. Although plenty of regular cyclists could do it and probably do it. But it's also not just about the bike ride. I mean, putting these slides together did make me reflect on how how you can learn from doing these things and apply the lessons that you takeaways you can get from ordinary life. So I'll split these slides into two sections. One is about the ride, how I managed it, where it went, and the second is a few takeaways as a result of that, which I thought were useful for me at least. So here we have a picture of Snowdonia, taken from the island of Anglesey in the very northwest tip of Wales. So I picked this as a title slide, partly because I like the cloud formations, to be honest, but also I think it represents a good cross-section of Wales, the contrast between an an arable landscape and a mountainous landscape, which is very typical of the country. It's also green, and most of Wales is green because it's mostly raining there. So that's why I picked that. So how did this ride start? Well, it's my wife's fault, really. She bought me a Christmas present of this guidebook for Long Las Cymru, which is Welsh for the Green Lane of Wales, or approximately Welsh. And it's a remote cycle route that goes from the very southern end of Wales up to the very northern tip. And I'm not sure what my wife's intention was, but she knew me well enough to know that that would probably mean I'd try and do it. Um, so where does it go? Uh, well, I'm sure you all know that the United Kingdom actually consists of four separate countries, Wales, England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. So here's Wales in the pink on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, there's a little bit more detail of the route. And you can see at the bottom, it starts at Cardiff, which is the capital of Wales, population of 500,000 people. And it goes all the way through to point B, which is Holyhead. Gateway to Ireland, the ferries for Dublin will go from there. Population about 10,000 people. And between that is about 250 miles, 400 kilometers, about 18,000 feet of ascent, 5,500 meters of climbing. And the guidebook suggests an itinerary of between 4 and 7 days, and it'll take 38 to 42 hours. And you can see the route going over through the industrial centres, the old steelmaking areas of Merthyr Tydfil, over the Brecon Beacons, up through to the Black Mountains, then up to the Cambrian Mountains, then into Snowdonia. So you go over the four main mountain ranges in Wales. Um, it's less off-road than I prefer. I normally like to go on bridle paths and slightly more technical trails. There's a bit more tarmac than I'd have liked in this, but it's pretty remote. You don't see that many other people, and when you're on tarmac, there's virtually no cars. Um, so having looked at that and the stats in the books, I decided that I'd try and do it in 4 days. And I thought 38 to 42 hours looked a little bit pedestrian. So I thought it was probably doable in something under 30 hours. So that was what I was hoping to achieve. Um, so that got me to thinking, well, is this really a very sensible thing to do? As a pensioner, should I be doing this? How do I know I'm not going to drop down dead in the middle at the top of a mountain in the middle of nowhere? So I thought about the factors that I need to get right. So in terms of planning, here's some of the important things that you need to think about, or I felt I needed to think about. So health, are you in a healthy position? Well, yes, I thought I probably was. I do quite a lot of exercise. I know my body reasonably well. All the medical tests I've had are clear. And as you get older, you understand that you don't hit the red zone and stay there as long as you might have done when you were 20 or 30. And so I felt I understood my body well enough that I was okay. Fitness, well, I probably do 10 to 20 hours of exercise a week. The lengths of the days were within the compass of what I might do at home. Motivation, did I really want to do it? Well, yes, I did. Why? Um, to feel good, to um, to enjoy myself, to feel like I've achieved something, give myself a bit of a challenge. Um, but necessarily doing the whole thing at the whole time at all costs probably wasn't the motivation. But I wanted to do it. So I thought a little bit about motivation there. Nutrition, well, that's pretty important. As I'll say, break out a bit later. You really need to understand how to fuel yourself. Otherwise, you run out of fuel very quickly. And when I go out with other people, if they struggle, it's usually not because they're not fit, but it's because they're not taking on enough fuel. Recovery, could I do 4 days in a row? Didn't know that. I've got a sort of recovery drinks and things that I take, but how would my legs cope with 4 days in a row? That was a bit of an unknown. Weather, as I say, it rains all the time in Wales, so I was ready for that. But we also picked a weather window. We only booked it out the week before, so I picked a weather window that looked pretty good. Mechanics probably wasn't on the most sensible bike because it's a sort of off-road bike and probably it's a bit harder to ride when you're on easier territory. So that made life a bit harder. And I had to think about the mechanics of dealing with breakdowns on the road, which I'm not that confident about. And route finding and safety. How would I manage route finding? Well, I had my Garmin bike computer, which is what Derek tracked, which is a bit like a sat nav for cycling. But it's only as good as the file that you download, and sometimes it takes you in funny places, so you have to be a bit careful about where you go and how you do it. Um, but I felt although I could tick all those boxes, one strategic decision was, do I carry everything myself for the 4 days? Well, I had a very accommodating base camp manager in my wife who was prepared to uh, meet me at the end of each day in the hotels we'd pre-booked, so I didn't have to take more than I needed for the day. That wasn't necessary, but it would have changed the planning if I had to carry everything because the weight would have been a little bit higher. Um, so they'd have had to cut a few corners. So overall, I thought that's fine.
You can share with us how you negotiated that with your wife later on, actually, because that's pretty impressive. If she was driving the car and stopping at all these two-star hotels or whatever it was. Anyway,
Yeah, well, we can chat about that one.
let's look at the route, David. And I
Okay.
followed David on his Garmin app, which was really interesting. I could see exactly where he was, exactly what hills he was going up, and everything else. A fantastic piece of kit. But back to you, David.
Okay, yeah. Well, here, this is a printout the first day from Garmin of the route it took. So it starts right on the Bristol Channel, and here's the photo of me at bright and early in the morning, um, uh, by the Cardiff Bay docks, which is the start point. And from there you cycle along the Taff Trail, which follows the River Taff out to Cardiff. And it's a little bit surreal actually, because you're starting in a big city, knowing that very soon you're going to be in some pretty remote landscapes. And in 3 days' time, you're going to be cycling around the bottom of Snowdon. That just felt like a completely different world. Um, so you basically follow the old industrial infrastructure that transported raw materials out of the centre of Wales to the ports. So that would be coal, iron, limestone. And you see here next on the slide here, this is the old Brecon Canal, which was built for exactly that purpose. You go on a lot of old disused railway lines, which I think the first locomotive-drawn train was in 1804 from Merthyr Tydfil down into Cardiff, and you follow the route of that line. Um, Beyond Merthyr Tydfil is reservoir land. So here's two reservoirs. You're going cycling through trails in forests, and you don't really know where you're going other than following the route, the bike computer. But here we've got the Talybont Reservoir, and you can see right at the top, that's where you start, having climbed up out of Merthyr Tydfil. You've got a fantastic run all the way down that mountainside through the forest that brings you out down here. So it gives you an idea of the scale of where you're riding. And finally, yes, there were flowers out. This is the top of the last climb before I dropped down into the end point, which was a place called Glassbury. And for any book nerds, it's among you, it's very near Hay-on-Wye, which is the second-hand book capital of the UK, I think. So that was the first day, 114 kilometers, about 5,000 feet of ascent, or 4,000 feet of ascent. And it was quite pleasant actually. It worked really well. Um, so on to the next day. This goes from Glassbury, and then it heads up through the Black Mountains, which is around here. And there's quite a bit of up and down, but it's quite a short day, ending in a town called Llanidloes, which is an unpronounceable Welsh name for anybody who can't do it. This day was pretty hard, actually. You'd thought it was the simplest one, but my legs felt very tired. I'd given myself a few options to make it a bit tougher if I wanted to get off the route, but I very rapidly decided not to do that. So here we've got the bridge over the River Severn at Builth which is about an hour and a half into the ride. This is the shallow point of the River Severn where they allowed where you could take livestock across. And there is still to this day a very large livestock market in both Wales. And we've got a very typical Welsh landscape, green mountains, which is taken up near a place called Rhayader, which is up there. And finally, this is Llanidloes, which is a very quaint and lovely town. I recommend it to anybody who wants to go for a trip around Wales, or if you want to see ospreys, because there are ospreys nesting in the forest nearby. So,
Doesn't see many cars there, you know. It looks like the 1980s to me.
yes, I told you the roads were quiet.
Brilliant, brilliant.
Um, and so on we go to day three, which has the most climbing in it. There's two, well, not most climbing, but it's got the two big hills in it. You start from Llanidloes, go through the Havron Forest, which is this photo here of it. We'd had some heavy showers. I was beginning to think, oh, I'm going to have to cycle through rain all day, but luckily it cleared up, and this is just the sun coming out. It felt like you're in the middle of a tropical jungle at that point. But eventually you climb up to the high point. You can see the showers up here. This is about 500 meters of ascent. Um, and and you get some great views. And indeed, down here is the view north from the high point, which is where we're heading. So you had career down the hill at an enormous speed for about 8 kilometers to a place called McCuntliffe, which actually sounds really easy, but it's very easy to lose concentration. And when you have a problem is when you think it's all okay and cool and you can just go for it. And so that's the point where you really do need to just keep your attention and make, because there could always be a car coming around the next bend.
Mm.
From McCuntliffe, you've got about a 10 kilometer of ascent, going up through old slate infrastructure where everything's made of slate, the houses, the roads, the fences, the road signs, and you see all the old slate mines and quarries. And if you see this photo here, right in the distance of this valley is where it wends its way up. And it goes up to gradients of over 20% in a couple of places, which is just a real struggle. And eventually you come up to the top. There's this pretty remote spot, which is the last big climb, and you think, well, hey, I've done all the difficult bits, and here's the descent. You go down, which is down past a place called Cadair Idris. So that's around here down into number one, which is a place called Dolgellau. Then you go along the Towan estuary to a bridge, a place called Barmouth, and then head up along the coast to a place called Llanbedr, where we booked a place to stay. So that was quite a long, demanding day.
And looking at the Garmin map, there's some red on there. That means you were really struggling up the hills, weren't you? That was the really
No, red's the fast one. That's
Oh, okay.
coming
That's
down the
danger.
hill.
Oh,
That's
okay.
that's coming down the hill at an enormous rate of knots towards McCuntliffe. So the
Oh, okay.
blues, the slowest bit is that part there, which is the steep climb up through the slate valleys.
Oh, okay.
And
Excellent.
that's this bit. But I did say we've got a railway bridge, and I know you like railways, Derek. So
Yeah.
the next slide is for you.
Fantastic. Well, that's brilliant. So that is the Barmouth Bridge, which was built in 1860, if you can see the right-hand slide. And they tried to close it down about 50 years ago, 40 years ago, under the Dr. Beeching cuts because of the expense of keeping it going for 4 trains a day, but they weren't allowed to. And the other thing I was going to say is I know I was there 5 weeks ago, but I was traveling by train rather than cycling like David. But the amount of migrating birds is absolutely sensational. Probably, first stop from the North Pole on their way to the breeding grounds or the other way round. So that's a fabulous part of the world. But you may notice here, no one tells you this, that the weather in Wales is a bit dodgy, to say the least. Back to you, David.
Yes, well, this is a warm summer day in Wales, and actually the ride goes along a disused railway line that goes on the left-hand side of this estuary. And it was really hard work because we were going into a real headwind. So although you think, whoa, it's great, it's a nice flat disused railway line, you had your head down and grinding into this headwind. And eventually you get to the bridge, which is right in the distance there. And then you cross the bridge, and then you're on the home run up to Snowdonia, which takes you on to day 4, which actually was the longest day, and to my surprise, the biggest ascent. I didn't really think it was going to be. So you start going up a pass, which is this is the top of that pass above a place called Porthmadog. So you're looking down towards the coast, which is where the bike ride is going to take you around that coastline before it then heads up north to a place called Carnarvon. So you go down and then round, and then you get to this is the harbour at Porthmadog. And there's another train for Derek, which is the steam railway at Blaenau-Ffestiniog, that goes to Blaenau-Ffestiniog. And then you head up towards Carnarvon with increasing views, as you see here, of the Snowdon mountain ranges from the south. Eventually, you get to Carmarthen, which is about probably 75 kilometers into it. So you've been going 4+ hours, I'd have thought by then. And at that point, it's feeling pretty weary. Carnarvon's number 1 there. and it was quite a struggle. It wasn't supposed to be very hilly, but you basically go up the coast, cross the bridge into Holyhead, and then cross Anglesey, which is supposed to be reasonably flat before you get to Holyhead. But that was a struggle. My backside was sore, and when your backside's sore, it's quite hard to think of anything else. And so you're always wanting to get off and have a stretch and a walk around, but if you do that, then you're going to be spending a lot longer getting to the end point. But eventually, I got there in good shape, well nourished, and here we have the final slide, final picture with the sea at Holyhead in the distance, and next stop is Ireland. So that was a very successful ride. As I expected, it was physically quite demanding, at least for me. As I said at the start, it'll be different for everybody. And the sum total, it's about 27 hours of cycling over 4 days. So averaged over about 100 kilometers per day, which in cycling terms isn't massive. 1,400 meters of ascent per day. It's decent, but it's not like awe-inspiring. But I think doing over 4 days, I think was the learning point for me that did become more of a struggle. 14 liters of energy drink consumed. My routine was to have you need about half a liter per hour, which is quite a struggle to pour that into yourself, and about 11,000 calories of energy bars and drinks. If that was all energy bars, it would be 4 to 5 kilograms of energy bars that you consume to get through it. But that to me is the secret of doing these sort of things. You have to work as hard at feeding yourself as you do at cycling, and if you let that go, particularly when you get to a climb, you're going to struggle. So that's anybody planning on doing it, that would be my advice. So that's a sort of pen picture of the ride. Um, and it's definitely something I would think about. If you're into cycling, it's worth a go, but you do need to get yourself up for it. Um, so that's the end of the first section. Do you want me to go on to the second point?
Yeah, keep going, David. There's a couple of things I'm going to mention while you get yourself into the second section. Is the steam railways in Wales have all been developed into tourist attractions, and there's about 5 of them. You showed at Porthmadog, where the Festiniog Railway and the Welsh Highland Railway come down. Those of you who know me well know that I'm seriously into those sort of trains, and we visited it in May when you did this talk, when you did this ride, didn't you? Somebody asked in the chat, when did you do it? And it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago. You actually did it in a good week's weather. And
Yeah.
You actually had to stop last year when you did it, didn't you? Because it was absolutely dropping out the sky.
Well, it was potentially going to. On the last trip, I got through to the fourth day, and there was forecast thunderstorms, and there was clouds, and it looked horrible. So you knew you were cycling into the weather, and I thought, well, I'll start and see how far I get. But I mean, that point around motivation that I mentioned right at the start is important. If you know why you're doing it, that provides a framework to make decisions about that you need to make as you go along. And I had absolutely no desire to spend 4 hours cycling through a thunderstorm with potentially heavy lightning. Forget the lightning, it would have been utterly miserable in heavy rain.
Yeah.
So by the time I got to Carnarvon, I'd got away with it that far. Really, really humid, and it looked like it was about to break. So I stopped there. As it happened, it just stayed humid and just little drops of rain. But I've no regrets on that. That was the decision I made, and I think it was the right one given the conditions I saw. So you just have to be aware of why you're doing stuff and make
Absolutely.
change of
Yeah.
plans. Which is maybe a good lead in to the takeaways from this. Some of the takeaways
Right.
from this. So this experience made me reflect a bit on it. And I mean, we go through life using our experiences to grow and develop how we deal with life. And that's from the moment we're born, that's what we're doing. And we've got a choice whether we sort of binge watch life as it goes past us with the nice, safe, predictable things. No, not much scope for a surprise, not much scope for risk, but a reasonably comfortable spot to be in. Or incorporate a bit of risk, surprise, challenge, and that's what I think a challenge is. Um, we're not quite sure if we can cope with it. We're not quite sure if we're going to be able to succeed, but we feel quite quietly confident we'll find a way when the time comes. And those are the right sort of challenges to take on board, which, having thought about it, I felt this was one. Um, and those challenges then become those create the experiences that fuel our personal growth. It's that that stops us atrophying. I mean, from the time we're 20, we're gradually getting weaker and our bodies are not working as well as they could. And the way you avoid that and manage it is by continually challenging your system, whether it's your body or mentally. And that's supported by the biology of how your brain and your body operates. So the first thing I thought about in terms of a learning point for me was the contrast between go for it and plan for it. And nowadays, the modern fashion is to go for it. You just need to look at Nike and just do it. As long as you've got a positive attitude, you're enthusiastic, you think you're going to be doing it, you go for it, you're going to be successful, and that's the way to get on in life. And I think this is encouraged by TikTok videos, where people randomly post stuff. Way, I'm off doing something, and isn't it great fun? You only need to look at the mountain rescue TV programs on UK TV to see the people who get stuck because they'd watch somebody go up a hill on TikTok and realize that they couldn't cope. They'd gone for it, but they hadn't planned for it. Contrast, if you spend all your time planning, you never do anything. So you have to incorporate risk, and the key is to balance the two. And there was a bit of go for it in this. I wasn't sure how it was going to go. Previous year, it didn't go. But I thought about it and I planned what might happen and why I was confident it was going to be okay. And the planning leads you on to the next point, which really struck me that don't underestimate the value of contingency. The obvious thing is that if something goes wrong, you've got a resource to fall back on. But it's not just about that. I mean, if you know you've got contingency, you know you've created a safe environment for yourself, safer environment. It may not be risk-free, probably isn't, but it's that safe environment that allows you to commit to your goals. So you could be a professional sportsman. You're always one injury away from the end of your career. You could be a small businessman. The insolvency of your biggest client could bring you down tomorrow. Or you could be in a large corporation that hires and fires. You might come into work tomorrow and they don't want you anymore. And what allows you to perform well in any of those environments is knowing that you've thought about how your life is not going to end if these things happen, that you have resources available to continue to live your life and grow and thrive and survive. Might not be easy, might not be comfortable, but at least you've got that safe environment. So for me, I had contingency in most of the factors that might have been an issue. So previous year, I had contingency to stop at Carnarvon. I also had contingency to stop earlier. So that really strikes home as something to appreciate the value of. Last one, break big goals into little ones. You all know this because there's lots of different words for it in psychology, but it really struck home. When I was at Carnarvon, I was feeling weary, and I wasn't not going to do it by that point, but I had 60 kilometers ahead of me that I wasn't feeling particularly great. I'd taken my energy on board, my body was a bit sore, and I had 60 kilometers. That was going to go on forever. Well, the way I dealt with it was 60 kilometers is only 10 lots of 6 kilometers. I've got 10 laps, 6 kilometers long to do. And actually, 6 kilometers is only 4 lots of 1.5 kilometers. And 1.5 kilometers isn't very far to cycle at all. So I started off by cycling 1.5 kilometers. By the time I'd done that, I was on my way to the first, well into the first lap. And then 1.5 kilometers later, I was on the downhill slope to finishing the first lap. And thinking through that as I go through, I was biting it off in little bite-sized chunks that I could absorb, that I felt motivated enough to do. And that there were other little tricks I played on myself, but that was the prime one that I was just counting it down in those little chunks. Now, it struck me that we go we've all had times as parents, as coaches, as teachers, as people at work, as bosses, where people have said that's not possible. I can't do that. I can't win that client. Those targets aren't doable. I can't learn that. Well, the trick there, if you've got a goal that you can't achieve, just stop for a second and imagine, oh, I've touched the mouse enough.
Happens all the time.
If you stop for a moment and imagine a world where you were able to achieve your impossible goal, you don't need to believe it, but just imagine it. What's the first step you would take? And for me, on that occasion, it was cycle 1.5 kilometers. And I think whenever people are faced with an impossible goal as a coach, that's a useful approach to take.
Mm, absolutely.
So,
Yeah. And that's called chunk in the psychology that I've learned. That's called chunking goals down into small pieces. A couple of questions in the chat box, David, before we close the recording. Number one was from Tony. Said Tony Woodall said, "Could you walk this trail?" I think the answer is probably no, you couldn't.
of
Um,
course you could. Just take a
uh,
bit longer.
it would take a long time, wouldn't it? And you wouldn't see anyone. There'd be no support, I guess.
Well, you'd have to plan for it. So you'd have to go for it because it would be pretty demanding.
Mm,
Uh, it's you're virtually never on roadways, even where you are alongside a main road. It's a shared pedestrian cycle path. So there are little places where you have to do that. But yeah, I'd have thought that was walkable. I think I could probably think of other walks I'd rather do. But if you want to walk 400 kilometers, I think you could do it, and you just have to work out what your stages were and how you'd feel yourself through them.
I think the answer to Tony, who lives in California, might have been the Welsh weather. It may not be conducive for walking 400 kilometers. You'd probably want to walk the east side of the UK, wouldn't you, rather than the
I
or
think
do
if
the Three Peaks or something like that, I
you're
guess.
doing 400 kilometers anywhere in the UK, I think you probably have to be ready for some bad weather.
Yeah, but Wales is anything on the west coast of England. The our American friends are sending us all their rotten weather, aren't they, across the Atlantic Ocean, and it all dumps on Ireland and Wales. David, I think you got one more slide before we
Yep.
sum up.
You often ask for, well, what's your take, last point to make? And I think the thing that struck me was to notice and value your achievements. Now, when you first suggested this session, I didn't really think there was much in it. I thought, why would anybody be interested? It's not really a big deal. Um, and in one sense, it wasn't. Plenty of people have done many more impressive things, and plenty of people could do what I did faster and better. Um, but for me, it was demanding, and I felt I'd achieved something. It, you really helped me realize I'd been all too happy to dismiss it and move on. Um, yeah, I felt good about doing it, but that was it. And what's next? And you don't know it, but you got me to stop and think about it. You got me to stop and notice it, and then value it, and then learn from it, and turn it from being a passing experience into a lasting resource. And that's what life's about, turning your passing experiences into lasting resources. So next time something doesn't feel like a big deal, just stop and think, that's probably because you did a good job, and make a point of stopping and congratulate yourself. Um, Allow yourself some time. Don't just say, yeah, well done and move on, but stop, take some time and really enrich that experience in your mind, because that's what's going to provide you with the evidence bank in your head next time you're not feeling confident about something. Next time you get the imposter syndrome, you need an evidence bank to demonstrate to yourself that you are um, capable of dealing with the situation you're in. And it's taking the time to embed these experiences that helps you do that.
Mhm.
That was what you don't know you did for me.
Well, I'm pleased I did that because I thought what you were doing was absolutely fantastic. And neither of us are as young as we used to be. Although I know that when we discuss things, we think we are, but that's our brains working against us. But the one thing we did talk about when we rehearsed this yesterday was just to stop in life, just take a time out, just take a break and congratulate yourself, which is a word that Patricia put in my brain about 3 years ago. Congratulate is a fantastic word to congratulate other people and to even congratulate yourself. So can I congratulate you for doing that? And I was fascinated by watching you live do it on a map via Garmin, and it was absolutely fantastic. But also, can I congratulate you on coming on and sharing this with us, because it's very, very interesting, despite the fact that you may have thought at the time it wasn't. And can I ask everybody on Monday Night Live to give you a vote of thanks in the normal way?
Thank you.
Brilliant. This is the fifth time that David supported Monday Night Live, which is fantastic. He's talked to us about coaching and mentoring. He's talked to us about the psychology of negotiating from the work of Chris Voss, and talked to us about psychological safety and unleash the power of a growth mindset. So thanks for doing that for a fifth time, David. Absolutely fantastic. I'm glad I was able to persuade you despite your doubts. If you're watching this on YouTube or listening to this on the Negotiators podcast, would you please like it, recommend it to your friends, and come back and see us again live on Monday nights. David Skinner, thanks for joining us. And will you stay on and answer a few questions off the recording?
Yep.
Brilliant. Thanks very much indeed.